John Ulzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Ulzheimer.
Hello, this is John Ulzheimer. I am a consumer credit expert. I have over 30 years of experience in the credit industry. I've spent time at FICO, which is the company behind the FICO credit scoring system, and Equifax, which is one of the 3 recognized credit bureaus in the United States. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the different metrics with respect to debt. And so in other words, how does debt affect your credit scores is really a good, concise way of saying it. So there's a lot of meat on this bone, and there's a lot of myths that need to be dispelled when it comes to the effect or the impact of debt on a credit report, because it's variable, meaning that it's all over the place. So in the US, there are 2 scoring systems that are really dominant, meaning they make up almost 100% of the market of credit scores. Those built by the company called FICO, and those built and that are managed by VantageScore Solutions. Collectively, those 2 brands of scores are generated over 20 billion, that was with a B, billion times every single year. And both scores are extremely important and very, very commonly used. So it's important to understand how both FICO and Vantage scoring systems treat debt. So the myth about debt is this. Number 1 is that all debt is bad. You're listening to too many fake personal finance experts who are trying to sell you books if you believe that. That is absolutely not true. All debt is not bad as it pertains to credit scores. That's number 1. Number 2, utilization, which is the metric that looks at the balances on your credit cards relative to your credit limits. That is not the only metric as it pertains to debt. That metric, which is commonly referred to as credit utilization or revolving utilization, is also not worth 30% of the points in your score. That is another myth that you see. Unfortunately, you see that in reputable publications, but that's factually inaccurate. As it pertains to FICO, that metric is in the category that's worth 30%. It's not the category that's worth 30%. There's actually several other debt-related metrics in the category, and in total or collectively, all of them. So that big slice of the pie, that slice of the pie accounts for 30% of the points in your FICO score. So let's talk about, first off, let's talk about installment debt. That's an easy one to get out of the way. Installment debt. So installment means fixed period of time, fixed payment. So your car loan is an installment debt, meaning that you're paying whatever, $500 a month for 60 months. That's an installment loan. And once you get done paying it, you're done, the debt's gone, and you own the car free and clear. Installment debt is almost entirely benign to your credit scores. You can have hundreds of thousands of dollars of installment debt on your credit reports and have unbelievably high credit scores, whether they're FICO or VantageScore branded scores. What that means is that the impact of installment debt is very, very low. And the reason it's low is because installment debt is not as predictive of elevated risk as other types of debt. That's the answer to all the questions about, well, why does this count in my score? Why doesn't that count in my score? It's whether or not it's predictive of risk or of elevated risk. And if something is not predictive of elevated credit risk or not extremely predictive of elevated risk, then it's going to have little to no influence on your scores. So let's talk about revolving debt, and specifically let's talk about credit card debt. Obviously, that's the one that's more problematic. It's generally unsecured, meaning that the bank can't just come repossess something if you default on your credit card, like they can if you would default on an installment loan. And that's the type of debt that is considered in the debt to limit ratio, or the revolving utilization ratio that people seem to think is worth 30% of your score, which is not. The reason that debt is influential, what's the answer? I just gave it to you like 10 seconds ago, is because revolving debt, credit card debt specifically, is more predictive of elevated credit risk, especially if you have a lot of debt that's really approaching your credit limits. That is predictive of risk, and that's why your score can be lower if you have maxed out credit cards versus if you do not have maxed out credit cards. The number of accounts with balances greater than 0, another metric that's considered in debts in Vantage scores and FICO's scoring systems. Fewer is better. If you've got 30 accounts with balances, that's not good. If you have 3 or 4, that's perfectly fine. That's important to remember around the holiday season when people tend to go crazy and use a bunch of retail store cards and they kind of pollute their credit reports with nuisance balances. You don't need to do that. You can make the same purchases on one credit card, I promise you. Another one is line item utilization. So in other words, that balance to limit ratio that we talked about, which you really want to keep below 10%. That metric is considered not only in aggregate across all your cards, but also individually in a card-by-card basis. And so you really want to limit the number of accounts with balances if you can, because then that's also going to limit your line item utilization. So those are the type, obviously if you're in default on your debt, that's actually a different metric. That's the payment history metrics. If you have balances that are past due, that also can be problematic, duh. So hopefully this clarifies some of the myths with respect to debt, primarily the number one, which is that utilization is worth 30% and that all debt is bad. Neither of those are actually true. So if you have any other questions about debt, drop them in the comments section below and I'll do my best to get to them. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. We'll talk again soon.
For more videos and credit tips from John Ulzheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.